What? Sportsbiz Chat with DP and McGhee, the podcast that takes an often irreverent, sometimes cynical, and on occasion a serious look at the business of sports. I'm your co-host, David Parro.
And I'm Tim McGhee.
I guess it's fair to say that it's rare for us to start our show on the serious side of the business, but coming off our episode from last week featuring Leonard Marshall, combined with the news that broke from New York City on Monday night, I'm guessing there's a good chance that's where we start today. But for this show, that's your call, Tim. So what's on your mind?
Well, let's talk about it. Tragic shooting last night in New York City. Seems that the gunman, a lone gunman, was targeting the NFL offices at 345 Park Avenue. For those of you who are familiar with the area, it's just north of Grand Central. One of the, most, affluent commercial areas in New York City.
Certainly from a commercial area, it is unbelievable. Huge investment banks, obviously, on that street and very, very popular from a business destination standpoint.
Yeah, 4 people killed, including a New York City police officer. The gunman took his own life at the end in a sad coincidence. We were just talking last week with Leonard Marshall and his involvement in the issue of CTE. This gunman, we are not going to say his name, left a note suggesting that he was suffering from CTE or some other brain injury, and he was targeting the NFL. He did, and again, in another very sad coincidence, he took his own life with a long gun to the chest and asked that his brain be studied for CTE. And we talked last week about Leonard Marshall, who lost a very good friend, somebody that you knew, Dave Duerson, who took his life in the very same way. So really sad way to start the show. I don't know how we sort of transition to lighter topics while still keeping on the business of sports, but we have to try, right?
Yeah, and just to touch on this, I mean, it hits home in a lot of ways. I mean, I don't live all that far from there. I used to work very, very close to there. And you and I have both been in that building multiple times for visits with the NFL. So to then think, as the news was coming out, that that's what the target was, and then to think back to last week, and I was just struck thinking about the compassion that Leonard showed as he was talking about this subject, and then bringing up Dave Duerson. Bizarre coincidence on that front. But obviously this touches so many people in so many ways. And, I live in Manhattan. You're obviously in Manhattan a lot. We see a lot of stuff. We don't see this. We don't see people walking around with long guns going in buildings like this.
And I think you've been living in New York long enough. When something like this happens, there is usually a 0 or 1 degree of separation. And my sister called me in the middle of this to tell me that both her son and daughter, my niece and nephew, work in that building. Not for the NFL, but for another company. But thankfully, they were not there yesterday. And then I got a text from a very dear friend of mine whose daughter was very close friends with the young woman who lost her life. So we are, for a city of 10 million people, we are often, touched very closely by tragedy or come very close to the tragedy. But you're right, it doesn't happen in New York. The city that large, we don't have things like that happening.
Well, listen, it was this was a little different start, as we both pointed out, I think, than normally show. So I'm going to take the option and give you the next subject.
Okay.
I'll let you come up with another subject.
Well, I just came back last week from Austin, where I was in town for Major League Soccer All-Star festivities. Shout out to the league, the event people, the partnership group there. They do a really, really nice job of putting on an event. It's not the scale of the Super Bowl, but then again, nothing is. But really well done. The partners I spoke to were all very happy with their activations and how the league has been treating them. But a couple of big pieces of news came out of the All-Star. The first of which was the Board of Governors once again kicked the can down the road, for lack of a better term, about voting on changing the MLS calendar to align more closely with the international calendar. I guess the next vote will be taken sometime in the fall. I'm not sure. It wouldn't take place until the 2027 season either, but there's a lot of logistical things that need to be considered. And as Don Garber said in his State of the League, they want to make sure they get it right. So we'll see. But I know you wanted to talk a little bit about Commissioner Garber's.
Yeah, there's a number of things that came out. Obviously, Messi and Alba not playing in the All-Star game and being penalized.
Well, and can we just talk about that for one second before we go?
I'd love to.
So they were suspended for one game. They did not alert the league until either the day of the match or the day before. And the owner of Inter Miami called the punishment draconian.
Draconian.
Which you know as well as I that we like to make cultural references whenever possible. I am reminded of the great line in The Princess Bride. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means, because a one-game suspension was not draconian.
There's no way, in my mind anyway, in my goofy mind, that Lionel Messi did not know he had to know he was going to be suspended or penalized in some way. It's the simple rule. You play in this league. I know he's the greatest player ever, but there's so many people that are showing up for that. And to the point that you just made about how late he notified, it's just absolutely ridiculous that he wouldn't be penalized. And so yes, you're calling out, and any reference to 𝘓𝘓𝘨, by the way, is amazing.
But I will say this: Messi and Alba had played 9 matches in 30 days. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't have received the suspension, but it goes to the bigger issue of how much football is too much football for these players. And this is not just Major League Soccer. This is leagues around the world.
Even more so around the world. But I mean, it also brings up the question of whether or not an all-star game makes sense in a league. But that is kind of the American way, right? We do all-star games here.
And it was actually a well-played match. MLS prevailed over Liga MX All-Stars, reversing the outcome from last year's match. I thought it was well played. I thought the MLS, comported themselves well in this game.
Yeah, the point about playing too much is a legitimate concern, and all of those things need to get addressed on a global basis. Now, I think this idea of the kicking the can down the road does make me wonder, and this is gonna sound like a big bash at MLS right now, and maybe to Commissioner Garber. But I was watching an interview the other day when he was addressing things about how the TV deal is working out, what it's bringing, the changes, and so forth. And one of the questions was do you is part of the goal to move up in terms of where the MLS ranks in terms of global leagues? And his answer almost seemed as though I'm not sure it is. And when we're talking about, and listen, I'm certain it is. I'm certain it is. But it sounded as though when it comes to ownership in this league, maybe that is less of a concern. The valuations continue to go up. We've covered that on this show quite a bit. In some ways, belying logic when compared to other teams around the world and their popularity or other leagues and so forth. And so here's what we know, by the way, on the MLS Season Pass. An average of 120,000 unique viewers per match, which isn't necessarily great. In defense of the league, right? But
it's
in defense of the league,
hold on. Time out before I let you go on. It is not good. It is not good, especially compared to the last year before the Apple deal kicked in, where they were averaging 320,000 per nationally televised match. Now, I know it's different. Not every match was nationally televised, but anyway.
That's the defense, and it's a fair defense, by the way. Is they haven't necessarily, there's games going on, they have their game windows, so that's one of the things that's going to have to be figured out, is kind of that a little more game of the week, one game going on. That's not been the case. It's been more to measure it against like what an RSN used to do, right? Is like what are these games doing more locally? But that's something that obviously has to be figured out.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said earlier, that maybe it wasn't a concern of Commissioner Garber's that MLS be considered one of the world's top leagues. That would completely go against what he said when I saw a State of the League address back in around 2010, I want to say, where Commissioner Garber said that within 5 years they wanted to be among the top 5 leagues in the world. What was interesting, and I noted at the time, was he didn't say by what measure they would be a top 5. So by some measures they are, right? When you talk about franchise valuations in particular, they are one of the top 5 leagues in the world. But I don't think an argument can be made that they're one of the top 5 leagues in the world in terms of level of play.
And I will say this, until they're on the international calendar, even with all the uniqueness of MLS compared to other leagues around the world, until they're on that calendar, they're not going to be considered.
No,
I feel like, yeah.
Yeah, and there was a lot of conversations going on around will they vote, won't they vote, what are the logistics? And one of the things that I brought up with somebody from the league was when you go to the international calendar, which starts in August and goes through June, you have to be careful about scheduling because especially when you're coming out of the holiday break where you can't play games up north. And so at the beginning of the year, if they've got to front load games for the northern teams because they're not going to get the teams in the winter, my point was you can't win a championship in the first month of the season, but you can lose one. Meaning you can get so far behind in the table that it's very difficult to overcome that when you have 34 matches. They said that that would be addressed. Given that they didn't vote, I don't know how that would be addressed. But when you look at the other European leagues in particular, UK, Germany, Spain, France, and Italy, smaller countries, much smaller geographically, so much less diversity in terms of weather and climate. Mm-hmm. So that is not as big an issue as it will be here, and it's a big issue.
It is.
When you think about playing games in Montreal, Vancouver, even Foxborough in January, New York, at Yankee Stadium or Red Bull Arena, that's a
Not saying those issues aren't insignificant. I'm just pointing out that if indeed it is the goal, and I'm not so sure it is among ownership right now is my point. As long as valuations do what they're doing, maybe it's not, and maybe the commissioner has softened a little bit on that. I just don't think it's going to get to that rung. But you absolutely are right. Those are more serious issues than they are in other places. Not that England isn't. The UK isn't getting cold during the time of the season that they're playing.
But they're not getting the weather is moderate. But lest you think I was arguing with you, I agree with you. I do think it's inevitable that it will go to the international calendar for any number of reasons. Being seen as a top league makes it much easier for them to participate in the transfer window. It makes it easier during international windows for call-ups and so forth. So we'll see it. I just don't know when we'll see it.
I would like to take something up. By the way, we have an unbelievable guest coming off of last week's great guest that we're looking forward to chatting about on a number of issues. But this next thing I want to talk about, we might normally take on at the end, but because of their impact to their respective sports and what they meant, I wanted to talk about two very significant deaths over the last week, and one just happening yesterday. The first one, Ryne Sandberg, who was I heard it said somewhere that if the name hadn't already been taken, Mr. Cub, Ryne Sandberg might be the guy. Mm-hmm. Known locally, always and forever as Rhino. This guy was like the most humble superstar Major League Baseball's ever seen. I had a chance to meet him once, got to work on an ad that he appeared on for Chicagoland Speedway, as soft-spoken a guy as you'll ever see. But the reason he's so significant is there's a famous game known as the Ryne Sandberg game in Chicago. He went 5 for 6, hit 2 home runs. And by the way, the home runs were in the 10th and 11th inning, or the 9th and 10th innings against Bruce Sutter, both of them against the great Cardinals closer Bruce Sutter. It happened to be a game of the week with Bob Costas on the call. And that's what cemented his fame in that city, and it made the Cubs relevant. A great friend of the show and a good personal friend of mine, Andy Clark, wrote me last night after the news broke, and here's what he said was, Ryne Sandberg made the Cubs relevant again. And it was literally just over a year after the famous Lee Elia rant that we've referenced recently, where he ripped the fans of that club. Those fans have been among the best fans in sports since Ryne Sandberg was there, and that place is an unbelievably cool place to be, Wrigley Field. So he deserves the level of attention he's getting. A 2005 inductee into Baseball's Hall of Fame, and certainly well deserved. The other one is Hulk Hogan, and died at only 71, and he, in a lot of ways, I think reshaped what WWE became. Was super popular, and of course he had that more than a cameo in what I consider the best sequel in the Rocky series, Rocky III, where he played Thunder Lips. And so just two very large figures in the world of sport entertainment on the Hulk Hogan side passed away way too young. Ryne of metastatic prostate cancer, which they thought they had under control and came back. Just a brutal loss.
Yeah, and I'm a collector. Ryne Sandberg was universally known as very friendly to the collectors. Yeah, great loss for him. Goes down, there's talk about some of the worst trades in the history of baseball. Nolan Ryan for Jim Fregosi, some other players involved. Danny Cater for Sparky Lyle, who went on to win a Cy Young with the Yankees. But Lou Brock for Bobby Shantz, and who else was in that trade? Ernie Broglio was the guy in that trade, supposedly. Ozzie Smith being traded from San Diego to St. Louis for Gary Templeton. But Ryne Sandberg for Ivan de Jesus, who was a very decent major league player, has to go down as one of the most one-sided trades in baseball history.
My brother, who's a big Phillies fan, wrote me today and he said should have been a Philly. But he did get to manage a few years there in Philadelphia, and he worked his way up through the management ranks, which was a kind of classic Ryne Sandberg in a way. And I heard about some quotes from some of the players he managed on the minor league level, and he's the guy's a Hall of Famer, and he's riding around in a minor league bus and having no problem with it, apparently. I think he was that type of humble guy, respected the game. His speech when he was inducted was very much focused on doing things, playing the game the right way. And a very very laid back, very humble superstar of the game.
Do you know who Ryne Sandberg was named for?
I don't.
Ryne Duren, the old Yankee relief pitcher, who won at least one World Series with the Yankees.
Probably have time for another subject or two before our guest joins.
I want to talk about what happened the other day in the Phillies locker room. Rob Manfred, commissioner of Major League Baseball, is going around to each of the major league clubhouses, talking to the players. According to everything I've read and heard, he is not mentioning the term salary cap. He is trying to position his talks with the players around the problems that the league are facing, but I think it's fairly easily inferred by the players that owners are going to be going for a hard salary cap in the next CBA negotiations. According to reports, when he was talking to the Phillies, Bryce Harper said, if that's what you're going to talk about, get the F out of this locker room. And then Rob Manfred said, no, I'm not going to get the F out of this locker room. They did shake hands at the end. I think what that speaks to is, notwithstanding the way he positioned it, I think it speaks to the role that Bryce Harper might very well be playing in the CBA negotiations. A couple of my friends who aren't in the sports industry asked, well, why would somebody who's making all that money care about that? And I said, it seems that in every CBA negotiation, top players who've gotten theirs understand that they've gotten there through people in the past who took stands and made commitments. And probably the most notable example is LeBron James in the last NBA negotiations. So it wasn't surprising to me that Bryce Harper would do it. Now, I don't know if he's going to be the best spokesperson for them. That remains to be seen. He's a bit of a hothead and hot-tempered guy. He's been suspended many times for arguing with calls and so forth. But it doesn't surprise me that somebody of that stature stepped up in that way.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting, and this comes off of detailed discussions that we had last week regarding the WNBA, CBA negotiations, and I think you're right. A lot of this comes down to the unification that the players can hold. And I was teaching or guest lecturing at a high school group at Columbia last week, and we spent a whole hour just discussing with these people that think they may want to be in this business about the WNBA CBA negotiation, which, by the way, was fascinating. And it's unbelievable the different views that you could get on it, even with anyone that follows the sport. But that is one of the main points that you just brought up, is are the highest of the high in terms of their salary and status in the league, towing the line that labor takes, which is to support and make sure that they don't create a cap or soften the cap, whatever it ends up being, and make sure that the rank and file are able to raise up what those minimums are. And I think that's what good labor negotiations have to do from that side of the equation. But yeah, it is interesting that these stories are now getting out. We talked about it with the WNBA. Are they unified in the way they message? and it's going to be the same as on the MLB side. Now you are on record. Well, you didn't say that there was going to be work stoppage in either case, but you did say that you wouldn't be surprised if both in the case of Major League Baseball and in WNBA that we had work stoppage of one kind or another, either a strike or a lockout.
No, and that's certainly that interaction between Harper and Manfred didn't make me feel any more confident that I'd be wrong.
Right.
I think in any labor negotiation, whether it's in sports or any unionized environment, the unity of the rank and file is absolutely critical, because if management can put a wedge in the rank and file, then they gain a lot of leverage. So when somebody like Bryce Harper speaks out, it shows the younger guys, we're all in this together. So I thought it was important for no other reason than that. What do you think? I mean, we talked before we came on the air. There's a ton of stuff that we could talk about, but you want to take a quick break?
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be welcoming our guest here soon.
Great.
It's time for our guest.
So as I was thinking about how I might introduce our next guest, my initial thought was to say that we were excited to welcome someone that has done it all in the sports industry. However, I realized that would be a gross understatement, because the fact is Frank Vuono has, yes, done everything, but he's done it again and again and again. A proud Princeton Tiger alum, Frank began his career at Young and Rubicon, where according to his LinkedIn profile, he was a cocky young account guy, which I love, by the way. He then moved to the NFL, where he made a major name for himself as a licensing guru. Safe to say, Frank is one of the reasons the NFL is the world's most profitable sports league. He then went on to build Integrated Sports International, or ISI, into a major force in the sports business. ISI folded into SFX Clear Channel, where I reported to Frank for not long enough. From there, it was the forming of 16W Marketing, one of the greatest named agencies in the business, and he did that along with Steve Rosner. It never seems like Frank is short of projects, and he has now launched Fourth Quarter Marketing and was just named to SBJ's 2025 Champions Class. So, Frank, welcome. It's an absolute delight to have you join us.
Well, thanks for that. That's a little embarrassing. So I'm glad to be with you. It's great to be reunited with one of the old SFX gang. And yeah, you're right. We had too short a time together. I had real high expectations for that. But as you know, some things dissolved pretty
time. Yeah, so. Very, very interesting time. So we're going to go launch in, because there's a lot of things we want to talk to you about today. You've seen this industry from every perspective, and what we wanted to start with is what are the things what are the biggest changes that you've seen in that time that you've been a leader in this business, and what are the things that ultimately have remained the same?
Well, I think one of the most dramatic shifts in professional sports, and frankly now college sports, has really been the shift from being owner-controlled to being player-controlled. I think there's been a huge shift in power. In the beginning of my day, I joined the NFL late 1985. The owners really didn't place any real value on the players, and that was really across all the leagues, if you think about it. And in the NFL, the owners were all about its team first. Its team fans don't really care about the players. They really care about their teams. And obviously, there's been a tremendous shift. And now it's gone all the way to where the players are not only controlling their own destinies, they're kind of dictating to the owners how they should run their teams and so on, but they're also branching out and doing things on their own. And, it's great, because I'm kind of proud to say I tried to do that and tried to anticipate that very many years ago, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that today. So that's one of the biggest shifts I see. And then also, it's gone from family owners who won their teams in poker games, literally, and think about it, right? To billionaire businessmen who obviously saw the opportunity to not only have an ego, opportunity and own a team, which is great, ego boost, but also see it as a business perspective and understand that the team's values have probably increased at a greater rate than anything else in the U.S. economy over all this time. So, there's these billionaire investors who now know how to run businesses and are very business savvy versus the old-time family guys who, who were learning as they went.
You mentioned that you started at the NFL at 1985, and as far as we could tell in our research, you didn't have any licensing experience before joining the league, but yet you somehow built it into a licensing powerhouse with over less than 10 years, over $2 billion in revenue. Simple question, how'd you do it?
You know, honestly, I'm not being humble or whatever, but it was relatively easy. About when I interviewed NFL properties back then, I had originally interviewed in 1982 when I worked at Young and Rubicam, and my boss was next door neighbors with a guy named John Bello who was running NFL properties. You're laughing, David.
No, that's great.
So, you know, John was out trying to beat up my buddy Matt's kids in the basketball game, and you know, and he asked Matt, my boss and really good friend, I had my wedding at his house, you know, hey, you know, a young marketing guy, advertising guy who knows sports, you know, we need somebody over here. So, you know, Matt graciously volunteered my name. I went over, interviewed, I got offered the job, but it was 1982, and the NFL was going on strike. So, I turned the job down. So I told this story. Can you imagine being the youngest son in an Italian family around the kitchen table telling your father and your brothers, your older brothers, you turned down an NFL job. And at the time I was working on Stay Free maxi pads. Can you imagine what that sounded like? You know, my brother smacking me upside the back of the head. You turned down a job at the NFL to work on Stay Free maxi pads, and he didn't put it that politely. Getting married, and you know, I was worried about, hey, you know, they could be layoffs or whatever. So I didn't take the job, but I came back around in 1985, and I went and interviewed again. And there were some people in from our creative offices on the West Coast. So we went out to dinner after my day of interviews, and they asked me, you know, so what you think? What did you think of the business? I said, listen, I think the business could instantaneously be 3 times as big as it is. You're really not supposed to say that in an interview. You're insulting everybody at the table. So they all were aghast, and they, you know, were like, wow, you're really cocky. I go, you know, you're selling all kids stuff. You're selling all cheap stuff. You're selling replica stuff. You're not selling any authentics. You're not selling to adults. You know, there's huge upside. And they're like, wow, you think adults would really want to wear NFL merchandise? God's honest truth. So I'm like, yeah, I think so, you know, I'm sure of it. I said, you got imitation people making your jerseys. You got Rawlings, who's a baseball company, making your replica jerseys. They don't even make the football jerseys for the teams. Why don't you have the people that are making the jerseys for the teams make the jerseys for your customers, you know? So that begot NFL Pro Line and NFL Authentics. And that was my initial responsibility, was development. And new business development. So new business development was just doing things that they hadn't done in the past. And you know, I was in charge of what was on the field. I actually started participating in the actual writing of the policy, on-field policy for uniform policy with the league competition committee, because at the time they were adamant that everybody had a match with everything, and you couldn't wear a logo on the field. There was a great story that you'll remember. Jim McMahon, the quarterback for the Chicago Bears, 1985 Chicago Bears, one of the greatest teams ever. You know, that was one of my first assignments. I got involved with them because I licensed their rap song, the Super Bowl Shuffle. So I got to know the Bears or whatever. But Jim McMahon was wearing he was wearing some stuff that had Adidas on it, and it showed on his neckline, and then he wore an Adidas headband on the sidelines. And that was illegal at the time. No, but there were no real rules that were written to govern that. Nobody had the brass to kind of rub it in the league's nose and whatever, and wear manufacturers' marks. So we had to develop policies for who could show their marks and who couldn't, and you know, that was part and parcel to what I did, what was on the field. So we had to write new rules, and we had to say, hey, if you want to be on our field, you got to pay. And that was all of the old companies back then, the Champions and the Russells and the McGregors. They were aghast. They were like, oh my God, we have an what they call an A&I division, athletic and institutional division. We sell this stuff to the teams. We don't give it to them. I go, yeah, well, you're getting millions of dollars worth of exposure on the field. So you know what? You're going to pay, or somebody else is going to do it. So that was kind of the whole beginning of that whole story. So it took off after that. And, obviously there was much more to it than that, but I just said, it's kind of funny. Part of it was, you live your everyday life and you observe stuff. And I look at something, I'm on the beach and I'm saying, why are there those kinds of umbrellas with Budweiser on it? Why don't we have umbrellas and beach chairs with Giants on it? And it's kind of as simple as that. So we branched out into all these different things. The owners thought I was crazy. When I first proposed to have a pet NFL pets program, they were like, "You're going to put our logos on pets?" I said, "Listen, people treat their pets better than they treat their kids, and they spend a lot of money on it. So believe me, we can do this stuff." So and they let me do it. But then, interestingly, we didn't report to the commissioner's office. We reported to a subcommittee of owners that were all very entrepreneurial, and it was Victor Kayam and Norman Brayman, and guys who were businessmen. And so they let me go. They let me run with it.
Yeah, but just think about just those things that you just mentioned, how much they've got institutionalized around other sports and how important it has been to making the NFL this 365-day-a-year product that it is now. So much of what you said is just about finding opportunity and seeing it and having, I guess, the guts to get in front of people and say, what about this? One of the things I associate with you, because I remember the timing of it very well, Frank, was the quarterback club.
Right.
And you talked about players having more control now. This was one of the first things I remembered, that it seemed like this is a great thing both for the league and for these players. And it started as the elite quarterbacks in the league, but you branched it out, and then I think managed it even after you had left the NFL, and maybe you started it after the NFL. Can you take us through that? Because it was just always one of the more interesting licensing programs that I recall.
Yeah, they say great ideas have a lot of authors, so I don't know that I started, but a lot of people took part in putting that together. But kind of funny, it all evolved real quickly from I sponsored Payne Stewart on the PGA Tour, and he wore NFL clothes, and that was something I was really, really proud of. And he actually taught me how to play golf and became a great friend. It's a big loss when we lost him. But so these quarterbacks were having golf tournaments, and they started calling me up asking me for merchandise, and then they felt guilty when I sent them merchandise, so they asked me to come and play. So I got out there and got to know these guys, and it started to dawn on me that they were really being misrepresented by the Players Association. One of the things was there were these little statues that one company was making for the Players Association, and they had the same person, only they painted them different colors and painted them different hair. So I got a couple of them. I showed Randall Cunningham and Boomer Esiason and the thing. I said, "This is Randall and this is you. Does that look like you guys? So, do you really think you're being represented properly?" And so ultimately I got to know the quarterbacks from playing in their golf tournaments and everything, and they asked me to kind of represent them. And there was a few people that had this notion of putting a club together. What we ultimately wound up doing was forming a separate company that they owned. And that's why I said earlier it was the predecessor of what the Brady's and the Mannings are doing now. They own their own company. There were 11 original charter members, but they hired me and NFL Properties, which was crazy at the time, to manage the whole thing. And three of the guys who were the original members, Warren Moon, Danny Marino, and Bernie Kosar, were on the executive committee of the Players Association. So that was really significant at the time. And what we did, though, is we kept their identities in the licensing programs for the trading cards and for the video games at the time. So they were still supporting the Players Association through the group associations, but they had their own company, and we went out and did our own thing, one of which was the NFL Quarterback Challenge, which you'll remember, which we used to get great ratings on, and it was great programming back then. And then we did that. We had the club for many years, from 1990 for 10 years or so, and we had very many members. When I originally wrote the agreement and the collective bargaining agreement at that time, in the early 90s, when the players were threatening to go on strike, we wrote in that we could expand the group for the quarterback club up to 40 players. And I said players, not quarterbacks. So Emmitt Smith and Jerry Rice came into the quarterback club, and they used to see me and say, "Frank, keep those checks coming." And so we kind of caught the Players Association sleeping on that one, and we expanded the group up to 40 members. Plus, when the guys retired, that didn't count. So we were up to like 50 members at one point in time. It really was a thriving thing. Importantly, though, to your point, for me, the only thing that we didn't do well was market our players as an NFL, because the players played under the helmet. People didn't know their faces. So we had to get them out from under their helmets. And working at the league and wanting to market players was, like I said, it was really an owner-dominated thing. So the owners kind of looked at me and said, why are you doing so much for the players? I kept saying the popularity of our game depends on it, and the future depends on it, because kids follow the players. They don't follow, they go with the favorite players. And we were behind in that in the NBA, with the NBA and baseball and such. So, there were the Michael Jordans and the Magic Johnsons and so on and so forth. And I'd stand up at conventions and everything. The only thing that we weren't more popular on was with the individual players.
So you had a great run at the NFL, tremendous success. You then leave to create ISI, Integrated Sports International. Anybody who was back in the industry back then knew who you guys were, built a great agency not far from where I'm sitting here in New Jersey. What prompted that move?
Well, there were a few things. Like I said, the top quarterbacks in the league, I got to know very well. They got to trust me, and they kind of asked if I could represent them, and I saw that as a big opportunity. There were some things going on that I won't really get into on NFL properties that were not great. There was just some stuff that bothered me. Ultimately, guys, somebody asked me recently with this whole SBJ Champions thing, you have any regrets about leaving the NFL? I said, well, if I would have known that Roger Goodell was going to make $60 million a year, I might have stayed. But back then, we weren't making a lot of money. And, I had to go to battle for all my people every year. And they'd say, well, the league office is only taking a 2% increase this year, so we can only take 2%. And I was like, okay, I was delivering 86% to the bottom line in the licensing business, highly profitable business. And I was like, wait, I'm delivering 86% profits. We're up, year over year, we're up over 40% a year. Remember when I said we would triple the business? Well, by the time I left, we were 7.5 times the business in that short period that I was there. So I just saw an opportunity, frankly, to go make some money and also do what I like to do, which was represent the players. And, we partnered with Lee Steinberg and Jeff Moran, who represented the top quarterbacks in the country. We had the number 1 pick in the draft for 7 years in a row. I got together with Steve Rosner and Fred Freed. Fred was representing Boomer Esiason, was working for ProServe at the time, and did the marketing for Michael Jordan and so on. So I got to know Freddie. He was Boomer Esiason's marketing agent, and we became good friends. And Steve Rosner was representing Lawrence Taylor and a bunch of other guys, and a Jersey guy like me. And so I saw an opportunity to put us together and do what not a lot of people were doing. We weren't going to represent players for contracts, only for marketing. So we were kind of Switzerland. We could work with a bunch of agents. We'd split commissions with them. It was a really unique concept at the time. And the agents, frankly, were lawyers who didn't know much about marketing and would admit such if they had, didn't have big egos. Even the top guys, out there, let us market their athletes and then split commissions with them. So we had a real unique concept, and it was exciting. And we took a flyer, and it worked out, So I also had a real, with Lee, we had the number 1 pick of the draft, like for the Dallas Cowboys, Troy Aikman. So Lee would sit down with the owner and bring us into the meeting and say, look, we could either do marketing together or we could take Troy and ambush the hell out of you. And, you go with Coke, Troy goes with Pepsi. You're not going to like that. So why don't we work together? You hire Frank and ISI, and we'll do marketing together. And so Jerry Jones was one of our first clients, a big client. And then we took on San Francisco 49ers, because I had a good relationship with, the owner. Carmen Policy became a good friend and so on. Eddie DeBartolo was always really good to me, so we worked with them. So we had a real strong foundation heading into ISI.
I'm glad you mentioned Fred, by the way, because I've known Fred,
Right.
I feel like, for a number of time, and I I might have even reported to him for 5 minutes during the
I think you
SFX.
did.
I can't remember.
I think.
But that brings me to what I wanted to ask you next. I mean, during your time at ISI, SFX, and 16W, you had so many people come through there, people that you mentored, people that I know still look up to you, Frank, and people that are peers of ours, and people that we know well, Jeff Sofka, Peter Hughes, Eric Bechtel, EJ Narcisse, like some people that went on and did a lot of different things in this business. Give us a sense of how important that role. While you're out like doing all these big deals, you also had all these people that came to your organizations that you kind of, I guess, spawned, for lack of a better word. Talk to us about the importance of that as far as part of your career legacy.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is real legacy. People ask about legacy and, shit, everybody takes credit for good ideas, like I said, but the real legacy is the people that have come along and you've worked with or mentored or whatever and given an opportunity in the business. And there's nothing more gratifying. This is real leadership. You hire great people, you give them the support they need and the freedom to fail. Steve, Fred, and I always said our greatest accomplishments are the successes of the people that were part of our teams along the way. I'm really proud of that. I look around, and the notes that I got from people with this SBJ Champions thing were just so moving, just brought me to tears, literally. Even people indirectly, David, we were moving fast and furious and working our asses off and everything. But to get notes that say, you saw something in me, you gave me an opportunity, you taught me this or that, or, you led by example or whatever it is, just a real touching, real meaningful. I'm tremendously proud of that.
So many people who have accomplished, and there aren't that many, so let me preface it by that, but people who have accomplished what you have accomplished, have had the success that you've had, might call it a day, might ride off into the sunset at this point in the career, but not you. You formed Fourth Quarter Marketing. So what are you focusing on with that venture?
Listen, I'm mostly retired. I'm doing a lot of volunteer work, which I'll get into in a second. But, I played to my strength in licensing and marketing. Now I'm kind of using my brain instead of working from, 7 in the morning to 9 at night, 7 days a week, like the crazy times that we used to do. And I use can I say Rolodex? Does anybody know what that is?
We do. We get it. Our audience might not, but
I've got one right over there.
People, it's our contact list or whatever you want to call it. In whatever file you keep it in, but it's about relationships, and so I try to help companies, mostly or in licensing. I try to help companies, teams, leagues, whatever, and make introductions, frankly, and make contacts a lot, and get paid for that, which is wonderful. It's been great because people return my calls, and that's a real compliment. Nobody says, "Oh, who the hell are you?" and what are you calling about? So it's great when people accept my calls, get back to me right away. I texted a guy this morning I haven't spoken to in many years. In like 3 seconds, I got a text back. I was blown away, and that's what I'm doing. Using my condom, trying to help a couple of developing licensees, try to get licenses in pro and college sports. And then interesting thing, working on a developmental young football organization in Europe and trying to help them out. And I really find interesting.
By the way, and I think, Tim, you'll appreciate this, and I think, Frank, you'll appreciate it as well. When I reached out to you following the SBJ thing, I was a lot more Machiavellian about it, because in addition to saying congratulations and all that, I said, we'd love to have you on the podcast, to which Frank agreed. So you got to take the opportunities when you get them, right?
Yeah, we've become those guys who we despise in the media, which be completely opportunistic and crassly commercial and craven in our efforts. And when I say we, Frank, I mean David, because he's the one who reached out to you.
Well, listen, the SBA Champions thing was a surprise, but it was really, really gratifying. First, they did a great job. They've got everybody together at their World Congress of Sports down in Nashville. Took my wife down, and we had a great time. They kind of rolled out the red carpet. We had a great session. in front of all the attendees there. But the selection was really satisfying and humbling, because it just made me proud that people hadn't forgotten my contributions to sports marketing over the years. You know, you kind of start riding off into the sunset. You wonder, you know, when I go back to Park Avenue or whatever, and all the youngsters are there and nobody knows who the hell I am or what I did, kind of like, you know, scratch your head and you go, oh, you know, did I do it for naught or what? But so this was really satisfying in that sense. And then you know, I went in with a terrific class with close friends. That was also really great, with Ross Greenberg and Carmen Policy and Dave Checketts, and you know, I got to meet Carol Stiff. I knew who she was, I knew what she accomplished at ESPN, but I hadn't really met her. I got to spend real quality time with her, and that was great. So, yeah, I've done great things with the others. You know, I worked a lot with the others, so it was a great class. You know,
it sure was a great class, Frank. And there's no one that looks at that list that's been in this business for more than 5 minutes that looks at that list and says Frank Vuono doesn't belong in that class on that list.
Well,
so certainly very well deserved.
Thanks.
You're gonna get the roast treatment, we understand, here pretty soon coming up. I mean, it seems like a year of awards. I know that there was some ones with like Princeton in the SBJ, and I hear you're going to get roasted. You tell us what the cause is about, and kind of fill us in on what that's all about.
Yeah, I've been a board member of Hackensack, originally Hackensack University Medical Center, which has now become Hackensack Meridian Health. We just announced today, guys, that it's Hackensack University Medical Center was rated by U.S. News and World Report in their honor roll, which means it's one of the top 20 hospitals in the nation. And that's the first for any New Jersey hospital ever. We just announced it today, as a matter of fact, so I'm thrilled about that. I've been on the board for 26 years. We're now 20 hospitals strong, over 200 locations for outpatient and so on, and over 37,000 employees. So I spend a lot of my time with that. I'm the vice chair of the hospital board, and I'm on 7 other boards there. So that's tremendous. So HMH is going to kind of celebrate my champions selection and do what they're calling a roast and toast to raise money for something that I helped start 10 years ago, which is called Tackle Kids Cancer, where we raise money to help kids with cancer, obviously. And the spokesperson for that is Eli Manning. And so it's the 10th anniversary of that. So we're in concert with that. The Giants, who I've had a lot to do with, you know, I did their Quest deal for their headquarters, and I'm close with John Mara. I sold suites at the new stadium, and Hackensack Meridian Health is a big sponsor, and it's the official hometown hospital of the Giants. So they're making their facility available, and we're gonna have a party. You know, when the Champions thing was announced, a lot of the old NFL properties guys said they weren't coming to the World Congress, but they wanted to get together for a reunion, so I'm going to hopefully use that as a reunion for a lot of the old NFL guys and all the other people we worked with at ISI and 16W over the years. And I'm going to raise money to try to attack kids' cancer. It's going to be a great thing. It was originally going to be September 18th, but we're just changing that date because it was too close to our annual gala, which is our biggest fundraiser of the year. So we're going to come up with a new date, and we'll let people know about that. But it's going to be a great time. And, you know, they want to roast my ass. So
I'm looking forward to seeing Eli's roasting of you. That actually will be comical.
You know, the Sims and the Size and all these guys, you know, they can cut me up pretty good.
Well, please, when you do have the new date, please let us know so we can share it with our listeners.
Yeah.
So before you joined us, we were talking about the tragic events last night at the building that houses the NFL's headquarters offices. We mentioned that we had Leonard Marshall on last week, who is very involved in the issue of CTE. This gunman apparently left a note saying that he thought he was suffering from CTE and wanted his brain examined. Just want to get your thoughts on that as somebody who worked in the building, somebody who's, to your point, has been around so many players, some of whom, unfortunately, may be facing that because of their career in the NFL. So we'd just like to get your thoughts before we close out the interview.
Yeah, first of all, it's just, I don't know, it's devastating. Really hit me hard when I heard it was in the NFL building last night. I really, I can't imagine, you're not safe in your own office. And it happened at 6:30 at night, and I was thinking I always work late, and, that's the reward you get for staying late and working, your butt off, and some nut comes in with a machine gun. I mean, it's, the people that lost their lives, the security people and the New York City police officer, I have nothing but prayers for those people's families and stuff. It's that feeling of not being safe in your own environment is just heartbreaking. Anyway, but for the guy with, suffered from CTE, I mean, I don't know that. I can't comment on a guy's history or whatever. I don't know if he played football at any serious level or whatever. But listen, there's no doubt that football is a violent game, and people's heads were affected. I probably was concussed 8 or 9 times in my life, a couple of times to where I was throwing up and so on, clearly concussed. And we used to say, hey, you had your bell rung, you got dinged or whatever. And I remember doing drills where I just saw literally white stars like the cartoons. We'd get up, lay on our backs, turn over, and then try to get who could get lower, and we'd just hit our heads constantly. And, it was crazy stuff. That stuff's all changed, guys. I mean, the good news is there wasn't an acknowledgement back when, years ago, for a long time about that kind of thing. And like I said, remember, it was owners dominated as opposed to players dominated. But I think there's a real recognition of that now. I think there's great pains taken to prevent head injuries with kickoffs and, how you can tackle and so on and so forth these days. One thing that I'm very sensitive about that really kind of ticked me off during my career was that, I literally had to do the Riddell deal for the NFL League and make Riddell the exclusive provider and have Riddell here, which I still think is the most valuable space in all sports, and right on the helmet right there, because people were going out of the helmet business because of the lawsuits for neck injuries and for paralysis and so on. And so Riddell was almost the last company left who was manufacturing helmets. If you don't have a helmet, you don't have a sport. So I tried to get the owners to invest, and they didn't want to do it because of the liability. And then I tried to get other companies to invest, and Riddell was the only one. So I signed a long-term deal with them as exclusive helmet provider. But I used to think the Nikes of the world and, the big companies of the world, if they really invested their technology in, and I still think so to this day, I think helmets have made a great improvement. There's 4 or 5 manufacturers now. I used to go into the helmet factories, guys, and if you would have saw what the, 𝘒𝙖�40 was the federal approval thing for the safety of a helmet or whatever. They used to call it 𝘒𝙖𝙀, NOCSAE or something, whatever, and it was on the helmets. You know what the test was? It was literally a 2x4 on a stand. They put the helmet on the end of it, and they dropped the 2x4 down, and it hit the helmet, and they saw how high it bounced off the ground. I mean, literally, that was the 𝘒𝙬 test. So I'm not kidding. It was that bad. So they've obviously come a real long way, but it just upset me that, Nike invested in a little pocket of air that they put in their shoe and made bazillions of dollars, right? And I would just go to those guys and say, why can't we come up with a system of prevention where the helmets were attached to shoulder pads, which would keep you from hurting the neck and so on and so forth. And if you could put those kind of air pockets in shoes, why can't we develop things that would go in a helmet that would protect you and so on and so forth? And I've frankly seen a lot of technology. People have come to me with it, and it's gotten turned down and so on. So I still think there's a long way to go with the protective equipment, but I will give the league credit for caring about this and being very concerned in terms of the rules and what they're doing in the league. But Leonard's right. In years past, the players were neglected. There's no doubt about that. But I think the NFL is trying to make up for it. So.
Listen, we know that when you came on, this wasn't, or we planned this discussion with you. It wasn't a subject that we expected that we would be taking on, but we very much appreciate you addressing that from your perspective. Normally, we ask 2 questions of our guests before we leave, but you've pretty much answered the first one, which is how did you get your start in the business? We've kind of covered that, but we do want to close it with this, is if you could, one piece of advice that you'd offer someone looking to break into this business, given all your perspective on it, What would be the one thing that you would say to particularly a younger person looking to break into the sports industry?
Yeah, I've thought about that and spoken about it a lot. I talked to a lot of graduate programs and so on. It's not just one thing. I guess it's kind of a stream of consciousness. It's first, you can't just say I love sports and I think it'd be a lot of fun and I think I'd be good at it and I know all the stats in baseball or I'm a stat geek or whatever. I follow everything. You know what? Nobody's going into the business who doesn't like sports, right? So you're not separating yourself by saying I love sports. And I also make the point that it's work. Okay, and I make an example real quickly of a blood relative of mine who was the senior executive of the Yankees. And I tell people, you're working weekends, you're working nights. You got to be there before. He worked for George Steinbrenner. You got to wait there before he got in the morning. You got to be there after he leaves. So 81 times a year, you're going to be in there from 7 o'clock in the morning till midnight, and then you're going to have to do the same thing the next day because you got 81 home games where you're entertaining people and stuff. So it's a job, guys. And you would think that that's the highest level in sports marketing, being the head of sponsorship or revenue for the New York Yankees. But so I make those examples that it's work, but I say demonstrate a real interest, volunteer or get involved in some way, shape, or form with local. Really good training in this game is minor league baseball because you got to be a jack of all trades, right? You gotta sell tickets, you gotta entertain, you gotta, the clowns or the entertainment or the fireworks after the game or whatever it is. You gotta be a jack of all trades. That's a good place to learn. And study courses that are offered, study relevant courses that are offered and do a job with that. And then expand your scope. Because immediately somebody said, just yesterday, I was talking to an old friend from NFL Properties' nephew, and he was immediately, I want to work for a team or a league. And I go, well, really? What makes you special? What's going to separate you from the thousands of people out there? But I say expand your scope because sports marketing is all about the companies that want to spend money in sports to get to a target audience. And that's something I learned early on from the old advertising days, right? So they're not spending money because it's not the old days where the CEO wanted seats on the 50-yard line. Those days are gone. And there's got to be a real demonstrable return on investment for these companies who spend in sports. And so there's all these thousands of companies who spend money in sports. They need people who are going to manage those expenditures and those programs. And so expand your scope to all of those companies as well as the agencies and the teams and the leagues. And so, change your philosophy. And I also say one last thing. Don't go sell tickets for a team. It's a phony promise, because that's how all these teams try to rope kids in, and they churn and burn them. And I know the owners or whatever, the general manager is going to get mad at me, but it's a false promise. Maybe one kid out of 100 works his way through that. Anybody I ever known who took that job quit after 6 months of cold calling and getting no for an answer. So it's not a good way to start.
Well, there is no way that I didn't expect you to come on and give your honest perspective on things, because that's the only way I've ever known you, Frank. Listen, unbelievable discussion. We can't thank you enough for spending some time with us. We wish you luck at the roast. Can't wait to hear more about that. Again, congrats on the 2025 champions class with SBJ. And just really appreciate it, Frank.
Good to see you. Good to be with you. Continued success with this. It's a lot of fun. I've been listening to I caught up on your past podcasts. They're really great. So good luck.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it. Talk soon, Frank.
All right.
You share with me.
Thank you again to a true legend in the sports business, Frank Vuono. David, I had very high expectations for this conversation with Frank, and he far exceeded them. What a fascinating guest. What an incredible career. And it's not over yet.
No, he is an absolute legend, and I feel fortunate that I had a chance to be around him. It was for too short of a time, but you talk to anybody that's worked with and for Frank, and there are some obviously great stories. There's so much that we could still talk about on this show. I do want to come out. A quick correction: I made a comment last week about the WNBA All-Star Game. Great numbers, and they weren't great compared to last year, they were actually down 30-some%, but it was still the second most watched. So still a pretty good audience against the standard that had been set over past years. I also, speaking of audience, I want to call out, we're now have been seen in or listened to in 66 countries. I just wanted to share that with you.
Wow.
And we've been heard in New Caledonia, the Republic of
what?
Republic of Moldova.
New Caledonia, where is that?
Malaysia. We'll go to countries where we kind of know where they are. Guam as well, but I think Guam is because my friend John, who's the mastermind and the lead guitarist in the Fez, he has to go to Guam for work every once in a while, and I think he listens while he's there. That's probably our Guam listening.
Well, and Guam is not a country, it's a U.S. territory, correct?
Guam, yes, but Guam gets listed separately. Do not try to bring this accomplishment down.
No.
What
does John do that his business brings him
John
to Guam?
He's an engineer, and he does serious defense-related stuff that I can't talk about because I don't know, because he can't talk about it with me. Just put it that way. Just pretend I didn't bring that up.
Okay. No, we don't want to get in trouble.
But I also want to say that as of today, behind the U.S., it used to be Australia and Canada, and the U.K. were our top places. Singapore has emerged as our second biggest place. That seems a little weird to me. I'm going to have to dive into that a little more. Anyway.
They do have a significant expat community, a U.S. expat community, so that might explain it.
And it's a great place to visit, by the way. And the Grand Prix there is fantastic. So one of the things we talked about wanting to see this week was the new Happy Gilmore 2 on Netflix, a new movie. And I think we've both watched it now. And so we wanted to somewhat give our review, I guess. Give a review of the movie. And I just wanted to give my thoughts quickly. First of all, entertaining enough to watch. It's not going to win any, it's not going to be nominated for any Oscars. It's not that type of movie. But what it did in terms of calling back the original Happy Gilmore and the appearance of so many celebrities in it that obviously wanted to do it, including golfers, that some of whom had a couple, some acting chops, it seemed to me, or surprising chops, I should say. Mm-hmm. My favorite cameo performance, and I don't think it was almost beyond a cameo, because it seems like they gave him a fair number of lines, was Scottie Scheffler. Totally new perspective on the top number one golfer in the world right now in Scottie Scheffler.
Made fun of his arrest last year, played that into the plot line. I agree with your assessment. It's not going to win any Oscars. It was exactly what I expected it to be, having read some reviews and having seen the first movie. A couple of things that surprised me. First of all, when your first song in the soundtrack is Swinging Party by Replacements, you've got me. Hook, line, and sinker, right? When, if you've got the mats, I'm all in. Yeah, I thought one of the great cameo lines, Travis Kelce is playing the waiter. Jack Nicklaus asks for half iced tea, half lemonade, and Travis Kelce says, and Arnold Palmer says, "No, I'm Jack Nicklaus, but I get that a lot." I just thought that was a brilliant line and delivered really well.
You saw it coming a mile away, and it was still perfectly delivered and very fun. And Nicklaus was surprisingly good. Lee Trevino he was in the original movie.
And interestingly, he was really the only professional golfer who would lend himself to that first movie.
Yeah, and now they're out in droves. John Daly has a
pretty big part.
He had a very big part. He had as big a part as Steve Buscemi, who's a legit actor. And quite honestly, you almost didn't even need him, even though he's appeared in Adam Sandler movies before.
Which John Daly is squirting the hand sanitizer into his mouth as if he's taking a shot. But I will say, I had a kind of WTF moment, and I don't know what her connection was, but Kelsey Plum, the WNBA star, comes in at two different points in the movie playing somebody from a community organization or some such thing. And I'm thinking, what is her connection to Adam Sandler and all these other golfers? But I also, patted myself on the back for recognizing Kelsey Plum.
But that was one that's impressive, because I didn't pick that up until I looked later, and there were a few of those like that. Now, of course, I recognized Wake Forest's own Will Zalatoris, who played the grown-up Blondie, caddy that he almost strangled in the first, and he did a great job.
Yes,
And he had to act a little bit because he had to show that emotion of being upset and pissed off about Happy Gilmore. Bad Bunny, Post Malone, people from all over the entertainment industry obviously have fun with Adam Sandler, and it looks like they had a blast on this set. I mean, you know, and then Shoffley's delivering the "that's what she said" jokes. They obviously gave him these lines, and they had to all go for it or decide to. Rory had a big part.
Yeah.
Reggie Bush is in it. It was great from that standpoint. I'm actually looking forward to spending a few more hours watching it again to make sure I pick up all the cameos.
It might turn into my own Zapruder film.
Maybe.
But
maybe.
How do I say this diplomatically? Haley Joel Osment has changed more since his childhood than virtually anyone else on the planet, maybe?
Yeah, I was about to say something, but I'm not going to make the joke. I'm gonna pass on it. He was a really good child actor, though.
He was good as Billy Jenkins, or
he was fine.
Bobby.
What did he keep calling him?
Bobby or Gary.
And of course, the great Chris McDonald in playing Shooter McGavin.
And even Nancy Lopez and Nelly Corder as the people who are trying to determine whether he's fit to return to society.
Right. A couple other quick things. We're going to have to talk about it next week because another Wake Forest athlete made big news this week. Nick Kurtz of the Oakland A's, the 20th man to hit 4 home runs in a game, and not only is he from Wake Forest and had this unbelievable performance like you rarely see and never seen by someone this young, by the way, going 6 for 6. But he also has a nickname that might be the best nickname in sports in the Big Amish because he's from Lancaster,
and I don't know. It's hard to beat Big Dumper. Cal Riley.
One of.
Cal Riley, if that's not a NASCAR driver's name, but the Big Dumper, come on.
And the other thing, I'm looking forward to watching this week is the MLB Speedway Classic from Bristol. Yeah. There's plenty of news going on in NASCAR. We might have to wait till next week to cover it all, but August 2nd, the Speedway Classic looks to be the biggest audience ever for a Major League Baseball game, and exceeding the 84,587 from 1954 when at Cleveland Stadium when the Yankees came to town for a doubleheader, and apparently tickets from every state plus some territory. So pretty amazing at Bristol Motor Speedway in the Tri-Cities area of Tennessee and Western Virginia.
Yeah, and they're going to have to convert it back to a track. There's a race there on, I believe it's the weekend of August 31st, if I'm not mistaken. My wife's birthday. Anyway,
there you go.
This is this episode reminds me of those coffees we would have in the city, which led to this podcast. It's going to be a long one, but I think it's worth the listen. But hey, I'm biased. Anyway, I think it's time we say goodbye. David, thank you for bringing Frank Vuono on. What a fantastic guest. We've really hit a streak of great guests. Thank you to our listeners. Please, if you like what you hear, like us, follow us, share us, comment, ask questions, engage with us. We'd love to hear from you guys. But until next week, he's DP, I'm McGhee, and we'll talk soon.